Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. So continuing on, apostasy began in Arabia and the army of Usama came back victorious. So now that Abu Bakr sees that the army of Usama is back and the Muslims are prepared to, not only have they defended the city of Medina so far, they're prepared to deal with what's going on around Arabia. And Abu Bakr is taking a very firm stance with the people around Arabia. He sends letters to these apostate tribes. So he makes a public declaration and he makes this statement. And the letter is basically saying, from Abu Bakr, the Khalifa of the Messenger of Allah, let's see if it's here. From Abu Bakr, the Khalifa of the Messenger of Allah, to each and every person, whether he has really accepted Islam or not. This is how he's addressing his letter. Let it be known to everyone that Allah sent Muhammad as a true prophet. Thus anyone who worshipped Muhammad should know that he is dead and gone. But whoever worshipped Allah should know that he is living and does not die. I have come to know that some of you have turned to follow Satan by performing acts of ignorance, forsaking Allah. I have decided to send a detachment made up of the emigrants, the muhajirun, and the helpers, the ansar, who are virtuous people. I have instructed them to not fight anybody without first calling them to accept Islam and to support those who have accepted. So he's sending a letter making it very clear to everyone that, look, we know what's going on. There's not going to be any compromise here. Either you're going to respond honestly and tell us what's going on, or you're going to decide that, you know what, we're going to pretend, to be half Muslims or whatever. There's no compromise in Islam. You cannot pray but then skip zakah. You cannot do this but then not do that. You have to either enter into Islam fully or you leave Islam fully. You get to choose. It's your decision. So he sent letters, and then along with those letters afterwards, he sent 11 battalions or 11 different armies all over the place. To Najd, which is in the east, Yemen, which is in the south, Syria, which is in the north, Oman in the east, Bahrain in the east. So let's take a look at this map. Unfortunately, I could only get a map in Arabic, but I'll explain to you. So this is Hijaz, this is Makkah and Medina, around this area, right? Yes. These arrows, okay, so here we go. This is Medina, right there. These arrows from the city of Medina are where all the armies were dispatched. Right? All of these, all over the place. So he sent them everywhere. And keep in mind, they're not very large armies here. But he's saying, okay, we're going to go all out here. We need to make sure that we need to control this rebellion and this uprising that's taking place. So he sent them all out. One of them, so let's see what happens in this entire phase of history here. Tulayha al-Asadi. Tulayha, hold on. Before that, he issued a letter to the armies, giving them instructions. So he said, I have issued orders to the commanders to stop their troops from creating disturbances and taking hasty actions which would result in chaos and havoc. Be careful of admitting strangers to your detachment without knowing exactly who they are. This is very wise advice. Do not allow anyone who you don't really know, and they say, well, yeah, I'm Muslim, I've accepted Islam. Don't let them into your army. Because you don't know if they're one of the spies pretending to be a Muslim or if they're a true Muslim. So you can deal with them as a true Muslim, but don't put weapons in their hands because you need to be extra careful. So he gave that advice, and then he said, treat the Muslims politely and show mercy to the people while camping and decamping. So treat them very nicely. Anyone who claims to be a Muslim, treat them very well. But don't put weapons in their hand and don't allow them to be a part of the army. That's sometimes we have this issue when it comes to, especially in today's society, with all the agent provocateurs that FBI is sending and all of that. Anytime a new Muslim comes and accepts Islam, I always get somebody coming and tell me, you know what? This guy looks like an agent. Something's wrong about this guy. I said, this is just one of the guys who took Shahada. This is like one of the 10 Shahadas in the last 2 months. Do they all look like agents? Yeah, they all look a little suspicious. Okay, I understand they do look suspicious, perhaps according to a profile. Our responsibility is to treat them nicely and deal with them as our Muslim brothers and sisters. But at the same time, you use wisdom. You don't give them the microphone and let them give khutbah, or you don't go and, put them in a class. A class is fine, but you don't start just discussing certain things with them that, perhaps someone could misunderstand or whatever. So there has to be wisdom, and Abu Bakr had that wisdom. Okay, so let's talk about Tulayha al-Asadi. Tulayha, this man was an astrologer. Okay, not an astronomer, but an astrologer is somebody who goes and reads the zodiac and reads the signs and reads the planets and says that the stars and the planets alignment tells you something about the future or what's going to happen in the world. Today we still have astrology. People still believe in that if your sign is this, then you shouldn't marry this person because it's not going to work out between you or something like that. All of this is against Islam. But Tulayha used to be an astrologer before Islam, and then during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he professed Islam. So he said that he accepted Islam. Now Allah knows what was in his heart at that time. Okay? But then, a little while after, what happened? He claimed to be a prophet. See, all the people who claim to be a prophet only claim to be a prophet after the conquest of Mecca. Because that's a great, people started realizing, look, the Muslims were so small, such a small group, and they've taken over Mecca. This is awesome. I mean, this is a great way to get political power in their understanding. So they started claiming prophethood too. So he's one of the guys, he claimed to be a prophet. Now, during that time, the Prophet ﷺ realized that this guy's, trying to cause a problem. So he dispatched a battalion to actually deal with this guy. But what happened was, as soon as that army had gone out, the Prophet ﷺ became sick. And as soon as he became sick, the leader who went to go and deal with Tulayha came back to Medina as soon as he got news that the Prophet ﷺ was ill. So what happened? What happened was, this gave Tulayha an opportunity to start rallying tribes from different parts. So he started rallying the tribes of Ghatfan, Hawazin, Asad, Amir, Tay, different tribes, and these are very powerful tribes, and he gathered them all and rallied them in the area of Najd. Najd is modern day Riyadh. Okay? So Eastern Arabia, he started gathering them, and he's claiming that he's a prophet himself. So now this is the situation now. So Abu Bakr has sent the battalions out already to deal with these people. Adi ibn Hatim, one of the companions, he was a convert from Christianity. So he was a Christian and he accepted Islam. And he used to be a leader of his tribe. Okay, a Ta'i, meaning he's from the tribe of Tai. So he's from one of the tribes which is started following this Tulayha guy. So he sought permission from the leader. He said, let me go and talk to my own people. They know me from before Islam, and I used to have a status amongst them. Let me try and convince them. So he went and he started discussing with his people, started debating with them. How could you follow this Tulayha guy? You know it's all about power and everything. Within a short time, his entire tribe realized, you know what, this Tulayha guy, it was just really a power struggle. We shouldn't be, we should see the truth as truth, not about tribal power or something like that. His entire tribe came back to Islam, and they left Tulayha. Then Adi went to the Jadila tribe, another tribe who he probably was friends with or something like that, and they also had joined Tulayha. So he convinced them as well that they should come back to Islam, and they came back to Islam. So 2 tribes came back to Islam. The other ones, which were very large tribes, they stayed with Tulayha. So what happened? So Khalid ibn al-Walid was one of the companions, one of the people who, we talked about one of the battles. Which battle did he fight in? He was nicknamed the Sword of Allah. Where did he get nicknamed the Sword of Allah? Battle of Mu'tah, right? The Battle of Mu'tah, where he managed a successful retreat against the Romans. The Prophet ﷺ gave him the title of Sayfullah, the Sword of Allah. So Khalid ibn al-Walid was one of the commanders. And he set out and he attacked this group of the people of Tulayha who were planning on attacking Medina. So he went and he attacked these allies, and the army was led by Tulayha's brother. So not by the guy who's claiming to be a prophet. Tulayha sent his brother to lead the army against the Muslims. And where was Tulayha? He was a little bit far aside in his little camp, and he said, I'm waiting for revelation to come to me. So while you guys fight, I'm going to be in the camp, I'm going to be in my tent, and I'm going to see, some good revelation is going to come, and we're going to figure these things out. Within a short time, the battle broke out. Within a short time, the enemy was defeated. Tulayha's army was defeated. But Tulayha managed to escape. So he escaped and he remained in isolation for a long time. So that was it. His prophethood is finished, it's over. The interesting thing about Tulayha is, later on, when a lot of his followers, these people who lost the battle, but they scattered, these people started slowly, after months and years, coming back to Islam. During the time of the Khalifa of Umar, the Khilafah of Umar, Tulayha himself came back to Islam voluntarily, came out of hiding, came back into Islam, and actually was one of the main people responsible for the conquest of Persia, which we're going to be talking about soon. So it shows you that this is a guy claiming prophethood. He repents, leaves his prophethood years later after being defeated by an army. And how did the Muslims treat him? They welcomed him back. Eventually they put him in a senior position in the army, and he was one of the people who actually helped the Muslims against the Persian Empire. Now just compare that with the fatwa that was issued, those are probably the older people only know this, with the fatwa that was issued by Khomeini when Salman Rushdie for 1 week announced his repentance. Some of you may not know that, some of you may remember that. Salman Rushdie for a week was convinced, and he announced publicly that he repented for writing his book and writing all these ideas. He said, I'm coming back as a true Muslim. And Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, who had issued the death sentence, which is so controversial today, what did he say? He said this guy can make Tawbah 100,000, he said something like he can make Tawbah 1,000 times, he can ask Allah for forgiveness 1,000 times, he will never be forgiven and he still needs to be killed. Look at the difference. This guy claimed prophethood and still his repentance was accepted by the Muslim community, and he got a position, senior position in the army. So it shows you how to deal with people who are sincerely repentant. But anyways, so Tulayha at this time is a very, very bad guy. So anyways, the army was defeated and Tulayha's army was scattered. So pretty much the main threat one of the threats around the Najd area was neutralized. So that problem was finished. So Tulayha is finished. One guy claiming to be a prophet is that issue is not there anymore. But there were more people. So other people were Sajah and Musaylima. Okay? So let's take a look at Sajah. Sajah bint al-Harith was a woman who used to be a Christian from the tribe of Taghlib. She declared her prophethood right after the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away. So remember we talked about the sensitive time where, imagine when the companions were confused after the Prophet passed away, imagine what the other people were going through. So everyone started going in, either refusing zakah, or some people were claiming prophethood because they wanted a power struggle. So she claimed to be a prophet, or a prophetess, or whatever you want to call it, and she actually managed to have gathered 4,000 soldiers around her. This is a powerful army. So she was on her way to attack the city of Medina. So imagine this, a woman is about to attack the city of Medina. It's interesting because we always talk about history in the past, saying, oh, well, women, they were always had never position or status or whatever. This is a woman about to attack the city of Medina where the Muslims are, they have khilafah. This is not something small. So she was about to attack Medina until she got word that Khalid ibn al-Walid had defeated Tulayha. The moment that she got word that this other prophet was, defeated, she said, okay, you know what, let's hold back a little bit. Let's stick with, more cautious maneuvers. Before we go, travel far, attack a city or something like that, we need to be cautious because the Muslims aren't as weak as they look. So another man by the name of Musaylima, we'll talk about him soon. He's another guy who claimed to be a prophet. So this becomes like a trend all of a sudden. Why? Because they saw that the Muslims were victorious. So this became a trend, claiming prophethood. So Musaylima also claimed to be a prophet, and he started to correspond with Sajah. And they started going back and forth and saying, what kind of prophet are you? I'm this kind of prophet. What kind of revelation do you get? Oh, I get this kind of revelation and all that. So eventually they decided, for the sake of, alliance and for the sake of power, let's ally together. And the best way to ally together is if we get married. So the prophet married the prophetess and they both got married together. Interestingly, I don't know how true this is, but the books relate that her dower, you know, the mahr that you give upon marriage, her dowry was that Musaylima gave her an exemption from the Fajr prayer and the Isha prayer. That's her dowry. So these guys are making exceptions all across the board. Anyway, might as well get some more, right? So that was her dowry, supposedly. So what happened was, they were married, but they were not living together because they were just married by correspondence. It was just a power marriage, right? They're not actually like living together or anything like that. So what happened is that, let's see, they got married. Okay, what happened was Khalid's army came, and when she met with Khalid's army, he defeated her entire army. She barely fled the battlefield alive, and she passed the rest of her life as a nobody, basically. So she went into hiding. So all these people, basically, all these false prophets, if they weren't killed, then they were defeated, and they just kind of like withered away into oblivion. Nobody cared about them. Their revelations all of a sudden stopped, and no one really cared to follow them. So she was finished. Okay. Then we have Musaylima. Okay, so Musaylima was from the tribe of Hanifa. You don't need to know all the details of the tribes. So it was from the tribe of Hanifa. When he heard about the Prophet ﷺ, his Prophet peace upon him's illness, that's when he declared himself to be a prophet. So he's one of the guys like Tulayha. He jumped on the band. He was one of the pioneers of claiming prophethood. Other people claimed prophethood after the Prophet ﷺ died. He claimed prophethood before the Prophet ﷺ, right before he died, when he saw that he was sick. So he said, this is a great opportunity now. So during the lifetime of the Prophet, he sent the Prophet a letter. And this is what his letter said. He said, since both of us are prophets, we should each share half of Arabia. You can see his intention already. So you keep the western side of Arabia, and I get the eastern side of Arabia, and we'll split half since both of us are prophets. The Prophet ﷺ, he responded, in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. From Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, to Musaylima, the liar. Musaylima al-Kadhab. That became his nickname. His nickname was Musaylima al-Kadhab, the liar with the Muslims. Peace be upon the one who follows guidance. And after that, the earth belongs to Allah alone. He gives power to whomever He wills amongst His servants. And the righteous shall have a great reward. And that's it. Doesn't need any response beyond that. So this guy, you can see, is claiming to be a prophet, and the Prophet ﷺ is already warning him about, warning his followers about these people. So Ikrimah, who was the son of Abu Jahl, one of the biggest enemies of Islam, Ikrimah was a believer, strong believer, good companion. So he was sent to deal with Musaylima at Yamama. And Yamama is in Najd, which is in the eastern part of Arabia, around modern day Riyadh area. So what happened? Ikrimah, the Muslim leader, he kept on getting the good news. Sajah has been defeated. Tulayha has been defeated. This other army, they gave up and stopped, their paying, started paying zakah and all of that. So he's getting all the good news coming in. He said, why do we gotta wait? Let's deal with these issues. Let's get them done with. So let's finish these guys off right now. So he didn't want to wait any longer. He said, we're gonna go. Abu Bakr did not give him the approval to go, because Abu Bakr is the Khalifa, and the Khalifa is not only the head of state, he's the head of army as well. So you have to get orders from him. So Ikrimah, against orders, went anyways and decided to launch an attack against Yamama, against Musaylima, who obviously is not going to make peace. He's not going to change his position. So he didn't wait for backup, because Abu Bakr was sending backup before they deal with Musaylima, because Musaylima had a large number of followers, and they were very powerful people. So he went, launched an attack, and the Muslim army was defeated. The Muslim army was defeated. Abu Bakr was furious, because he didn't wait for backup, which was already on its way. So he sends Ikrimah, he says, you are out. You go to Yemen now, you're not in this area anymore. So what does he do? Then he sends Khalid ibn al-Walid, who's like the hero by now, right? He's already doing a great job. He sends Khalid ibn al-Walid to deal with Musaylima in Yamama. So now Khalid reaches Yamama with 13,000 soldiers. This is a large army. Okay, for Muslims. It's a large army, 13,000 soldiers. But of course, the enemy had an even larger army of 40,000 soldiers. And they were bound together. So Khalid led the army towards Yamama. And what did Musaylima do? Musaylima went outside of the city of Yamama, and he camped there's the gates of the city. There's like a city, and then outside there's like the city, there's like a giant garden here, and then there's city gates, like fortified gates. So what they did was, all the soldiers went outside the city, and they were behind the gates, and they were fighting from there. So they had a very strong defensive position. So what happened is the fight broke out. And in the beginning, the Musaylima's army was winning. They were winning so much that they actually reached the tent of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Now the leader's tent is going to be where? It's the tent, meaning like you leave your stuff in the back, right? So his tent was all the way in the back. They made it all the way to his tent where his wife was. And they almost kidnapped his wife, actually. But something happened, so they didn't kidnap her anyways. But it shows you who was winning the battle in the beginning. So then the Muslims finally, they started motivating each other. And they mustered up some more courage. And they brought the fight into the garden. So eventually they managed to push them back. And then the defensive, the defensive line of the garden, they actually managed to get across the gate. And then the fighting broke up in the garden. Now there's a story of one of the companions, one of my favorite companions, or one of my favorite stories is, one of the guys, how they got into the garden was really interesting, because the gate is locked completely. So you have to somehow get through the gate. So basically one guy, he volunteered himself to be launched over the gate and open it from the inside. And they said, "Are you crazy?" He said, no, just you do it, don't worry about it, I'll handle everything. So they launched him over, they put him up on a shield and some spears, they launched him over like catapult. And he landed on some soldiers that broke his fall. He got up, he opened the gate, and the Muslims went in. So now, this is one of the fiercest battles, in the early history of Islam. The battle happened in the garden. And the garden became known as the Garden of Death, because so many people were killed in there. So this was a very, very fierce fight, because you're in this small area, everyone's just fighting till the death here. So it was a really tough battle, but eventually, the Muslims managed to win. One of the ways that they won was Wahshi. Wahshi was the same former Abyssinian slave who had killed Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, in the battle of Uhud, right? So now, at that time, Wahshi was a non-Muslim. Now he has accepted Islam, and he's a sincere Muslim, and he had repented and changed and everything. So he tried to make up for that by putting special attention on Musaylima. And he managed to he was a really good spearsman. So he managed to throw his spear with such force that it penetrated the double chainmail of Musaylima and cut right through his stomach, and he fell down and he died. So once they saw Musaylima was done, his army retreated completely, because there's no point in fighting anymore for them. So they left. So basically, it seems like Muslims have won. Muslim victory. What happens the next day? Now all of them, they run away. Either they run away somewhere in the desert, or they run away, a few of them run away back inside the city. The next day, Khalid ibn Walid, he decides, okay, now it's time to conquer the city. Now we're going to take over the rest of the city. They had captured some of the people during the battle. One of the guys who was captured, he was telling them, he says, "You know what, Khalid, let me talk, I want to talk to the leader, Khalid." He said, "Okay, fine, the leader, he wants to talk to you." So he starts talking to Khalid, and he says, "Look, you seem like a pretty reasonable guy, right? Look at how many people died in this battle, in this garden of death. Look at all these dead soldiers. Do you want more bloodshed?" And he said, "No, we don't want bloodshed." He said, "Then, you know what? Let's make peace." Right? He said, "Why make peace? You guys just lost the battle." He said, No. We have all these thousands of backup soldiers in the city. They're all ready to fight. There's going to be a battle right now. You try and take the city, it's full of soldiers. You haven't seen anything. You fought the reinforcements. You didn't even fight the real army that's waiting in the back. So Khalid is getting worried. He said, "Okay, this war is going to continue on for a long time. This is a big problem." So he says, "Look, I will represent my people. You send me over in the city, and I'll negotiate some kind of truce with them so that they give up their weapons and we have a peace treaty." So he said, "Okay, that sounds good. That sounds like a fair thing. So let's go ahead and do that." So the guy went over to the city, right? And he started pretending like he's negotiating and everything, right? So he makes his negotiation, and then he comes back and he tells Khalid, he says, what did he say? He says, these people are asking for, Khalid says, I'll give them, half, right? They get to, the Muslim army gets half of the possessions, and they get to keep half of their possessions. And they said, no, the people have rejected that. The people do not accept this. They don't want to give up half of their possessions in exchange for peace. They want something less than that. So he says, what do they want? He says, well, just take a look over there. So after the guy came back from the city, they went and looked at the walls, and they saw all the spears lined up, armor, shields. They see all these people behind the walls. Looks like a giant army prepared to fight. So basically they said, Khalid says, okay, they don't want to, give up all of these things. You can give up 1/4. So Khalid said, okay, let's give him half of their possessions. The man went back to the city. He said, no. They said you can only take 1/4. They're going to accept if you take 1/4, and you take 1/4. They keep 75% of all their wealth, all their stuff, their houses, gardens, everything. So Khalid finally decided, okay, fine. Against better judgment, he said, look, we want peace. We don't want war. Let's go ahead and give it to them, although this is not standard practice. So they wrote down a peace treaty. As soon as they wrote down the peace treaty, the Muslim army went inside. And what do they see? They see a bunch of old men, women, children, and almost no men. No fighting men, no young men who are ready to fight. So then he realized that he had been tricked. The man had tricked him, and when he went inside the city, he told all the women, all the old men, the children, everything, put on all the armor, put up all the swords everywhere, all the spears and everything, to make it look like there's this huge army. There's no army. There was no army. If they went and attacked, there wouldn't be anything. It would have been finished. So Khalid got really upset. And he told the man, he says, you tricked me. You tricked me, and the man just said, look, these are my people. I did it for the benefit of my people. So what happened was, at that time, Khalid is deciding what to do. Should we stick with the treaty or not stick with the treaty? A letter comes from Abu Bakr. And the letter from Abu Bakr says, do not make any treaty with these people. They're too dangerous. Make sure to take over the city. There's no negotiations. But Khalid already made the peace treaty with them. So what did he do? He says, the peace treaty was written first. And therefore, we have to honor our agreements. We have to honor our pledges. That takes precedence. And if Abu Bakr was here, he would also want, in his opinion, Abu Bakr would have wanted me to do the same thing. So they made peace, and there was a peace treaty, and they got to keep that amount of their possessions. So, they honored the contract. So it shows you how Muslims deal with people. Once you make a contract, you don't just break it because you're in a superior position. Or you don't just go and make something and say, well, because you tricked me, therefore I'm going to, take you out anyways, or whatever. We don't do that. So it shows you the way that Muslims deal with, peace negotiations and all of that. Moving on, so Yamama was over. So the threat in Yamama is finished. Let's go to Bahrain. Okay, Bahrain, also in the east. A little bit of history about Bahrain. There was a man by the name of Munzir ibn Sawa. He was the leader of Bahrain before the people of Bahrain accepted Islam. Remember when the Prophet, peace be upon him, he sent letters out to everyone. He sent a letter to the Roman emperor and the Egyptian and to the Persians and all of that. So he sent a letter to Bahrain as well. And the leader of Bahrain was Munzir ibn Sawa. He was one of the few, if not only people, who accepted Islam on the spot the moment that he received the letter. So he received a letter from the Prophet, he accepted Islam, and his people accepted Islam. When he did that, the Prophet ﷺ appointed him as the leader of Bahrain. He said, you can stay the leader, and you are the official leader even under the Muslims now. So he didn't replace him. But after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Munzir also passed away. Very, very soon, right after the death of the Prophet. It's just happened to be that way. So what happened? So the people, they lost their political leader, who was Munzir, and they lost their religious leader, the Prophet ﷺ, because they believed in him. So imagine what they're going through now, right? People who lost the Prophet were dealing with enough issues already. They lost both. So this is more, this is more to deal with. It's a very difficult situation for them. So what happened was, two tribes in Bahrain, The Abdul Qais tribe and the Banu Bakr tribe, they decided that they're going to announce their apostasy and they're going to leave Islam. Now, the idea that they had in their minds was that if the Prophet was a true Prophet, then he couldn't have died. See, the thing is, keep in mind, these are new Muslims, right? Sometimes that you enter into Islam sincerely, but you have some still mistaken notions about what Islam really is. And you will find that all the time. Some people come into Islam and say, so you're telling me that, Allah is, cannot manifest himself in a person or some kind of weird belief. And you're like, you entered into Islam and you still have this question? It takes time for people. It takes time. So these people, they thought like the Prophet's going to be somehow invincible, like he can't die or something like that. It just didn't occur in their mind. So this is one of the issues that they had. So they started getting some doubts. Now the political aspect of it was, a man by the name of Jarud, he was one of the influential members of the tribe of Abdul Qais. Previously, he was a competitor to Munzir ibn Sawa. So they were like political rivals, basically. So now that he sees what's going on, oh sorry, Jarud is not that guy. No, sorry, there was another guy who did that. But Jarud, scratch that. Jarud is a Muslim who's an influential member of the Abdul Qais tribe. So he's one of the guys who stays on Islam. He goes to the tribe in Bahrain, the Muslims, the people who are leaving Islam in Bahrain, and he goes and he starts debating with them. The same way that the previous guy debated with his people and they came over. So the same thing he's doing. So he starts debating with them. He says, look, you guys believe that the Prophet shouldn't die, but he died. Have there been other prophets besides Muhammad in the past that you believe in? And they say, yeah, of course, we believe in Moses and Jesus and we believe in Abraham and all of that. He said, did any of them die? He said, yeah, they all died. I said, then what's the problem? Why do you have a problem that this prophet is different than the other prophets? So after debating with them and discussing with them, they got the point. The entire tribe returned back to Islam. But the thing was, so they were repentant. So one of the tribes of the two that were rebelling in Bahrain came back to Islam through negotiation, through discussion and debate, which shows you that's one important way of bringing people back. But the Banu Bakr, the second tribe, they didn't want to listen, so they had to learn the hard way. Right? So what happens is the Abdul Qais tribe teams up with the Muslims, and the Banu Bakr, they team up with another guy. So who they team up with, right? So Abu Bakr had sent an army to Bahrain, like we mentioned, 11 armies, right? They arrived and teamed up with the Abdul Qais tribes. Basically what had happened was, all the Muslims in Bahrain had come together as one group. And all the people who were rebels who said, no, we don't want to deal with this, we're going to fight the Muslims, they got together in another group, and then there was a battle. So they had a battle and they went to war. This went on for a very long time. There was basically trench warfare. So they were in their trenches all night. So they go and they fight all day and they're shooting arrows back and forth. And then at nighttime, they go back into their trench and they wait there. This situation lasted for, I believe, an entire month. Right? So each night it kept on going. Every night they're fighting, they go back in the trench. But the Muslims were smart. What did they do? Every night they would be sending spies out to go and see what's going on. One night the spies come back and they say, you know what? There's a party going on in the other trench. Right? These guys are wasted. They're just drunk completely. They're gone. Right? So the moment the Muslims got word of that, they attacked them at nighttime. While all of them were drunk and partying and everything, battle was over. Right? It shows you that Muslims, they stay, even if they're sleeping, they're sober. Right? It shows you the importance of not getting intoxicated and the wisdom behind not drinking. This actually led to their victory in this battle. Those guys were like, let's have a little vacation, let's have a little break at nighttime. No one will figure it out. They figured it out and the enemy was vanquished. So many important leaders were killed and captured. So what happened was see, the thing is, whenever these armies were defeated, this was a political rather than a religious uprising. Which means that once that whole political idea of, we're going to take over and it's for the glory of the tribe and everything, once that was kind of like gone because the army had dissipated and everyone spread out, Then people started thinking again, okay, you know what, now we need to make a decision. Now it's back to decision time in terms of beliefs. Do we believe in Islam or do we not believe in Islam? Like I mentioned before last week, the other parts were mainly political considerations, for the most part, with few exceptions of the Prophet can't die and all of that. So this is a political issue more than it is a religious issue. Moving on to Oman, what's today known as Oman. In Oman, the people of Oman embraced Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, and he had placed two brothers in charge of the area of Oman. There was a man by the name of Laqit. Now this is the other guy. So Laqit used to be a political rival of these two brothers. So Laqit also, he went along with the idea. He was also, okay, I'm Muslim too and everything is going great. The two brothers are in charge of Oman, and Laqit used to be their political rival. Right? So what happened was, now Laqit sees this is a great opportunity. The Prophet just passed away. Now is the time for me to establish my right as the true leader of my people. So what's the best way to do that? Become a prophet. So he claimed prophethood as well. Okay, so he's now also claiming that he's a prophet, and he starts gathering, people together, kicks the Muslims out of the land, and basically a battle lasted between them and the Muslims as well. Within a short span of time, similar thing happened in Bahrain. Eventually the threat was gone. Over time, people started all coming back into Islam, or they started going in some remote areas and just living, amongst themselves. But the political aspect of all of these things was gone. So that's finished. So Oman is dealt with. Then comes Yemen. A man by the name of Aswad al-Ansi, we'll talk about him. Let's look at the history of Yemen. So we talked about this in the previous class. And for those of you who weren't in the previous class, I really recommend you get the book and at least try and catch up by reading the book. Not required, but it's recommended. So Badhan, a man by the name of Badhan, was the Persian governor over Yemen during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the Persians, if you remember at the beginning of the book, Persians and Christians have been fighting over Yemen for a very long time. When the Prophet ﷺ receives prophethood, who's in charge of Persia? Who's in charge of Yemen? The Persians. So the Persian Empire, who's up there, actually had colonized Yemen at this time. The governor, who is a Persian, on behalf of the Persian emperor, was named Badhan, and he was appointed by Khosrow Parvez. Okay, Khosrow Parvez was the previous Persian emperor. So he was ruling Yemen. He accepted Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. So he accepted Islam during that time. So this means that there were Persian Muslims before Muslims actually went into Persia. So that's kind of important to know, especially if you're into Persian history or something like that. So the Prophet actually appointed him governor over the region. See, this is a very interesting thing. So the leader of Bahrain accepts Islam, and he says, we're not going to replace you with a bunch of Arabs, or he was Arab, but we're not going to replace you with one of our guys. You get to remain the leader. We let you stay in power. The Persian governor who worked for the Persian Empire accepted Islam. Did the Prophet say, well, you're Persian, and these are Arabs, so you know what? You need to step aside, and we're going to put some Arabs in power. No. He let him, as a Persian, maintain power in Yemen under Islam. But it didn't last very long. So what happened was, Badhan passed away after a short time. When he passed away, his children took over. And his children and his other family members, they were also Persians. So what happened? Is that a man by the name of Aswad al-Ansi, this guy, Aswad al-Ansi claimed to be a prophet before the Prophet had passed away again, but after the conquest of Makkah. Everything is after the conquest of Makkah. No one claimed prophethood during the Battle of Badr, for example, because there's no political advantage. No one saw that as a strategy. So he claimed prophethood, and he revolted against the Muslims. He started killing off all the Persian Muslim leaders in Yemen at that time. And basically the Prophet heard about this before he passed away, and he sent a message to the Persian Muslims who were ruling Yemen, and he said, you guys need to stand up and you need to fight this guy. And you need to take care of this guy. What happened was, they managed to fight back. He had taken over a lot of land, but they managed to fight back, and they got rid of this guy. So Aswad is gone, the Persian Muslims at this time removed him. But what happened was, just before the death of the Prophet, just before he died, they managed to get rid of the rest of the Persian rulers, and they retook the rest of Yemen over. So these are not, so Aswad is already gone before the Prophet passed away. He's already dead. Okay, I know this is a lot of history, but this guy is gone, but his followers who are interested in political power are still there. So what happened was that they come and they decide, you know what, we're going to unite ourselves together. We're going to come back and we're going to go ahead and we're going to try to capture some cities. So they start taking over parts of Yemen. Eventually, the Muslim army that was dispatched by Abu Bakr deals with the remnants of Aswad's army, and they managed to get rid of them. So Yemen is also free from apostasy, and that's finished. So I know I've sped through all of this very quickly, but the thing is, to get a holistic view of what's going on. We don't have time for all the details really, because this is a summary class. So basically what happened was, within less than a year, under the leadership of Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, all of these apostate uprisings all over, which were is a really dangerous situation, all of them were eradicated. Almost all of them were finished, even though the Muslims were not in any position to actually deal with all of these things. Most of the people, after the political aspect was over, most of the people voluntarily returned to Islam. Some of them may have remained, whatever beliefs they wanted to. Most of them voluntarily came back and they entered back into Islam. When they realized that zakah is not something that's like a colonizing force, it's your brothers and you're paying the money that's going to the needy people. And it's going for a good cause, so it's not going for anything else. So within less than a year, it was done. The important thing is, as I've emphasized before, is that this was a political and economic apostasy rather than a religious apostasy. So in Arabic, they call these hurub al-ridda. Hurub means the wars, ridda meaning apostasy. The wars of apostasy or the apostasy wars. The problem is, that gives a wrong concept to people who today view religion as a purely individual thing that you choose, you do. There's no social ramifications of what you do. It's your personal belief inside your house. You're on the internet, you find a website, you decide to join this religion. It's no one else's problem. That perception leads people to think that apostasy is purely of a belief or a religious nature. But at this time, this is a tribal society. That's not the way the world was. So you cannot impose your beliefs on the way the world used to be, or on the way that the world is in another region outside of the West or outside of America. So it's important to realize this was a political and economic apostasy more than it was a belief or religious apostasy. That's why once these political reasons were kind of gone, most people started voluntarily entering back into Islam. And remember, their apostasy, they had just given up idol worship. Nobody returned to idol worship during this time. Nobody started building idols. So it's important to understand that from the get-go, so nobody gets confused. Because a lot of authors, they put some interesting excess emphasis on this. This is a belief issue, but it's not a belief issue. Okay, so continuing, the compilation of the Quran. So what happened was, after the Battle of Yamama, another very important thing that happened was, Battle of Yamama, Garden of Death, many companions were killed. Many Muslims were killed, but among them were very senior companions who had been around since the Meccan times. Right? A lot of them were killed in the Battle of Yamama against Musaylima. Okay, Musaylima the liar. So, and a lot of these had memorized the entire Quran. These are very senior companions. So what happened was, there was a recommendation that the Quran should be written down and compiled into one volume, just as a precautionary measure. Right? Now the interesting thing is that Abu Bakr, initially, he was hesitant. He didn't like the idea. He said, what, the Prophet never did it, therefore I'm not going to do it either. The reason why that's so important, actually, don't worry about that. I'm going to cover this in another class, about why it's so important to understand this part. Just know the story. So the thing is, so Abu Bakr hesitated. He didn't like the idea. Then when he was convinced, they went to Zayd ibn Thabit. Zayd ibn Thabit used to be one of the main scribes of the Prophet who used to write down the revelation. As the Prophet received it, he would tell him, this is what was revealed to me, and he would be writing it down. One of the main scribes. So Abu Bakr puts Zayd ibn Thabit in charge of this project. He said, this is your project, you need to do this. Zayd doesn't like the idea. So I don't think this is a good idea. Even though he was a scribe, he used to write. He said, this is a very difficult and I don't like the idea. Eventually all of them get convinced, we should do this, we should compile it. So what do? They get people, they gather up all the parchments and fragments upon which different verses of the Quran were written. They gather them all together, and then they cross-reference all of those with the memories of different people who had memorized the whole Quran and people who had memorized parts of the Quran. Eventually, they put it all down together, wrote the entire copy, bound it into one. It was not a small binding. This is giant bindings, by the way, at that time. This was not it's not papyrus paper or something. This was thick paper. So they had these giant. They compiled one giant copy of the Quran, and it was kept in the house. It was kept in the presidential palace. What was the presidential palace? Abu Bakr's little house. so they was kept in Abu Bakr's little house, which was the presidential palace, basically. The interesting thing about that is two important things to remember, and I won't go too much into detail. One, nobody objected to writing down the Quran at the end. No one like opposed it. Said, no, I don't accept this, and I'm not going to stand for this. Nobody opposed it, number one. Number two, also on this point, nobody didn't trust Zayd ibn Thabit and Abu Bakr and all these people that they had done the right thing. People were checking it, people were probably referencing it and making sure it's correct and all of that. Nobody said, you know what, we don't trust these guys. That's number one. Number two is that nobody regularly went and got this book from Abu Bakr's house to actually go and read it. Right? So there were no, these are Muslims, right? Every day they're praying 5 times a day or more, a lot more than we pray. Right? These are people who sit in the masjid too, like after Fajr we sit and we read some Mus'haf, we read Quran, a copy of the Quran. These people did that and more. But none of them are going and say, well, I need the warrior copy because I don't have a copy. They weren't doing that because either they had the entire thing memorized or they had a large portion of it memorized. So this was not something that was needed. So the reason why that's important is, because people come and say, there was only one copy. The point is, no one really cared. In one sense, no one really cared that there was a copy. The copy was just like, it's good to have just as an in-case thing. But no one really went and consulted it. So the whole idea of, people have this idea of, there's only one copy. There didn't need to be any copies because it was it was oral culture. So that's interesting to know. So what happened was the Persians. So moving on, the threat from the apostate tribes had ended. So the apostasy is finished. But there's still enemies in Persia and in Rome. There's a Persian Empire and there's a Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is to the north and which direction? West. And the Roman Empire is the Persian Empire is to the south and southeast. Southeast. Northeast. Northeast. We have to know a little, I'm not going to make you do much geography, just know a little bit. Okay, so this is Arabia, all right? Roman Empire, Persian Empire. Okay? So, these are two major empires, right? Now, these empires, they were also divided amongst themselves at this time. They were infighting and going, having political problems and all of that. So Abu Bakr decided we're going to deal with both of them at the same time. They were already dealing with the Romans. Usama just went on an expedition and dealt with what was it? What was it called? Ubna? Yes. So he just had an expedition with the Romans. So now they're going to deal with the Persians. Now the question is why? Right? Let's take a look at the Persians first. The Persians control a lot of territory at this time. They're one of the largest empires in the world at this time. They control Iraq, Iran, and other areas above and beyond that, outside parts of India, coming into the region of India and all of that. When the Prophet sent them a letter, all right, what did they do with that letter? They tore it into pieces. All right? The emperor tore it into pieces. So at that time, the Prophet made a prayer against him. Right? Because they tore the letter, he said, may Allah rip up your kingdom. Right? So now we're going to be covering the part where Allah ripped up their kingdom. Okay? Exactly as the Prophet said. So the first thing that happened was the compilation of the Quran. Okay, we did that. The battle of the chained ones. That was Salasil. Okay, so what happened was, Khalid ibn Walid, he received instructions to move from Yamama, which is in Najd, to go all the way up to Ubullah, which is in Persian territory. Okay, Persian province of Iraq. The city was governed by a man by the name of Hurmuz. So Hurmuz was the governor of this city. He was a powerful military commander. Let's talk a little bit about him. So he was one of their top generals in Persia. He was known for regularly going to India, which is west or east of Iraq? East. So he's regularly going to India and he's attacking the people of India all the time. This is Persian Empire. They're going to do whatever they want, right? They're very powerful. India also had a small empire at the time. So they're at war as well. So this guy, he was greatly feared in India because he was always getting incursions over into India with his fleet. So he had ships and all of that. So eventually when Khalid got near the city, he sent a letter to this guy Hurmuz inviting him to Islam. He said, this is an option, I would like to invite you to Islam. We know that, you don't like us and you ripped up our letter and all of that, but, you should consider Islam. This is what it's about. The Persian governor, what did he respond? He sent out this large army to deal with the Muslims. So they decide to attack. So the battle begins. The battle begins by, this was the first battle, by the way. So the battle begins with Hurmuz and Khalid having a personal duel. So this was a very common practice where usually a few warriors, they have a personal duel. They fight it out one-on-one, right? Usually it's not the commanders, but Khalid was a guy who used to love challenging the commanders to a battle in the beginning, right before the battle comes out. Because what happens is, if he's pretty confident of himself, right? Humble guy, but confident. So if you can take out the commander before the battle even starts, imagine what that does to the enemy morale. So he throws out the challenge, right? He says, come on, me and you, right now in the middle of the battlefield before we even start battle. So Hormuz is thinking, okay, if we can take Khalid out, this battle's over, right? They take out their general. So they start a duel, and Khalid does this on a regular. He does this all the time. So I'm not going to go through all the time. This is just one time I'm going to give you the little detail of kind of how it happens. So they go out and they start fighting. So what happens is they're fighting first with their swords. They're wearing armor and everything. Eventually the fighting is going on, breaking, they're going, clashing swords and everything. Khalid manages to maneuver the guy and twist his arm. So he manages to grab his arm, because it's not just about your swords, right? You have to use everything at your disposal. So Khalid is a very smart guy. He's like an MMA type of fighter, right? So he grabs the guy's arm, twists it, and his sword is on the floor. So this guy Hurmuz, he's a strong guy. What does he do? He grabs Khalid and he starts it becomes a wrestling match basically. So he grabs him, gives him into like a bear hug, and he's trying to squeeze the life out of the guy. Because you can't punch him because he's wearing armor. So you're going to mess up your fist if you try and punch him. So he's squeezing him, it's a wrestling match. So Khalid is a strong guy. So Khalid manages to basically lift him up into the air, slam him down on the floor, and he knocked the air out of him. So this guy he's gone for a few seconds, and then Khalid just finished him off. Cut off his head, and the guy's finished. Okay, so it just shows you how duels take place. I'm sorry for the sisters for the graphic. There's actually a lot more things, but this is war. This is what happens in a battle. This is not like some kid game or something. This is serious stuff, right? So Hormuz is gone. So basically, the fight breaks out. To make a long story short, Muslims are victorious in their first battle with the Persians. All right. Now, what happens is one interesting thing is Hormuz used to be, just to give you an idea of what the Persians were like. Right? These were very wealthy people and very luxurious people. Right? They used to live in pomp and splendor and all of these things, grandeur and everything. So Hormuz had a crown. He's only a governor. He's a military general and a governor of a city, but he used to have a crown that he would wear, a golden crown. So this golden crown actually went to Khalid right after he had killed him. Why does it go to Khalid? Now this is an important question. Why does Khalid get his crown instead of it going to the Muslim treasury? Does anybody know? Because he took him out directly. So whoever you take out directly, you get their possessions. That's the way it works. That's at least one opinion in Islamic law. One of the two opinions. So this was the opinion that he was going by at this time. So he got the crown. This crown was worth 100,000 dinars. Right? Now I told you I would contextualize Abu Bakr's salary for you a little bit later. Right? So what was Abu Bakr's salary initially? Initially. 250 dinars. And he got it raised up to 300 dinars. This is a governor of a city, and it's just his crown is 100,000. Right? He could work for 50 years and he wouldn't be able to afford the crown. Right? Just shows you we're not talking a very big salary here for Abu Bakr. But nonetheless, he had a salary. So what happened after this? There were several other Persian battles with the Persians at this time. And all of them were under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid, because he was considered the supreme commander of the forces in Iraq. So there were a lot of battles. Sometimes the Christian Arab tribes who were living around that area, they would team up with the Persians and they would be fighting the Muslims as well. So it was not just the Persians, it was the Christian Arabs as well. They would team up and they would be fighting. Sometimes the Persian army knew that they were about to lose. And when they were about to lose the battle, then they negotiated a peace treaty, which normally you would not do when you're about to, you would not give a peace treaty to somebody when you're about to beat them. Right? None of these empires would ever do that. But the Muslims used to concede to that. Even when they had the upper hand and they said, okay, we want a peace treaty now. We're willing to stop the battle now. They stopped the battle and they made peace. So it just shows you Muslim conduct, kind of what's going on. There's a lot of different battles that took place, and we're not going to get into the details of each and every one of them. Eventually, the Muslims managed to reach Al-Hira. Al-Hira is a very important city, so we're going to talk about it. Al-Hira was the capital of the Arab people who were loyal to the Persian Empire. So remember we talked about that, on the borders there are Arabs who are loyal to the Roman Empire, and there are Arabs who are loyal to the Persian Empire. So this was their capital of those Arabs, right? So they're basically fighting Arabs, they're not fighting Persians, although there are Persians involved in the army as well now. So the interesting thing about Al-Hira is, one, it's an important city, and number two, there is a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who prophesied that the Muslims will actually conquer the city of Al-Hira, where he talks about there will be a time where a woman will be able to travel from Al-Hira all the way to Yemen and in peace, in safety. So this was something that was mentioned indirectly, but it gives you, gives you an idea of this prophecy. Not direct, but indirect prophecy that Al-Hira would be there and there would be peace. So basically Khalid besieged the city. He besieged the city of Al-Hira, and the governor, he fled. So the governor of the city ran away. And the people decided, okay, we're going to make a peace treaty with Khalid. So basically they made a peace treaty, and they agreed to the poll tax, what's called the jizya. So let me give you a few comments about the jizya. What is the jizya? What is a poll tax? What does this mean? Basically what it means is that if a Muslim army or a Muslim state is going to be taking over a city, right? And this is they're at war, by the way. So if they're taking over a city and the city decides, okay, well, we don't want to fight you. Okay, what we're going to do is you get the city, but you leave us to practice our religion. You leave all our possessions, and in return we're only paying you what's called the jizya, which is a poll tax. Now what does poll stand for? It's not voting polls, right? What is a poll tax? Not exactly. It's partly protection, but there's a second aspect to it that a lot of people don't emphasize. It's important to understand. It's an anti-draft tax. You don't get drafted into the army, right? Basically what happens is, if you're not a Muslim and you don't want to accept Islam, then you will pay this poll tax so that you don't have to join the Muslim army and fight. But the interesting thing is, if you decided to join the army, and the Muslim decided to let you in because they trust you, and this happened many times in the past, then you don't have to pay the jizya. You're exempted from paying the jizya. And if you're too old, you don't have to pay the poll tax. And if you're too poor, you don't have to pay the tax either. So a lot of people are confused because this has become somehow a common issue or something like that. We're going to discuss it more in our Islamic law class, but this just gives you a little bit overview of what the poll tax is. It's a thing, one, for protection. So now if the Persians come and attack the city, Muslims are obligated to protect these people from anything. And obviously if they're going to protect them, they need supplies to be able to protect them. You have to have shields and armor and all of that to be able to have some army that can actually protect somebody. So it costs money as well. So this is what the poll tax is. So they went and they paid them the poll tax that they needed to get. But these people are really slick. Remember, these people have been living under the Persians for a long time. So you develop this idea of, well, this is the way things are done in Persia. So on top of the jizya, on top of the poll tax, they start giving Khalid all these valuable gifts. You know, pearls and nice clothing and everything like that. Kind of like a little bribe, but of course we don't call it a bribe, right? We'll call it, what do we call it? You know, when we give congressmen and all that, we give them to their campaigns and all that. We don't call them bribes, although they are bribes. We just rename them different things, right? You know, campaign contributions and those kind of things, right? So they're giving all these gifts. What does Khalid do? Khalid can take the gift. Islamically, he has the right to keep the gift. Because this is a personal gift. Islamically, somebody gave me a gift. Islamic law says, you gave me a gift, you gave me a gift. There's no American gift tax or anything like that, right? You gave me a gift, we're good to go. But what does he do? He sends all of the gifts straight to Abu Bakr in Medina. What does Abu Bakr do? Abu Bakr could keep the gifts. He said, well, Khalid sent me the gifts on his behalf, and I'm the Khalifa. So I can go ahead and keep all these gifts. Valuable, really precious gifts. What does he do? He puts all of them, so he has to make a decision. Either give it back to the people because saying we don't accept gifts, or keep it and do something else with it. So what does he do? He puts it all in the Muslim treasury, and then he sends them a message and says, I consider this to be your voluntary increase in the poll tax. This is your voluntary paying extra jizya for extra protection. Thank you very much. But it's not for a person. So Khalid doesn't get it, Abu Bakr doesn't get it. So it's very clear that they don't accept all these gifts. And this is the way the Muslim leaders should really be. They should not be people who, even if it's a real legitimate gift, they should be extra cautious as much as possible, not to try and take any of these things, because it can be perceived as a bribe and set a bad precedent for other leaders who are interested in those types of bribes. So what happened was, after the city of Hira was taken, the leaders around the city of Hira, in all the different cities around this entire region of southern Iraq, they started realizing, man, these Muslims, they're really nice people actually. I mean, they could have just wiped the floor with us. The army was gone. They didn't have to make peace. If the governor fled the city, they could have just massacred the people. That's what any other empire might have done. They could have captured everyone, made them slaves or prisoners or whatever. These are nice people. They don't even accept gifts. They're treating us nice and everything. Everyone started making peace with the Muslims. So they started entering into agreements. Okay, we want to make peace too. So basically southern Arabia, southern Iraq, most of southern Iraq either started accepting Islam or was conquered through peace agreements, basically. So they made peace with the Muslims. After this happened, now once they make peace, they're guaranteed protection by the Muslim army, and this is what happened. After Hira and other cities around there are allied with the Muslims, Khalid decides to send letters to all the other leaders of Persia around Iraq, this whole area. So he starts sending these letters. Among the letters, now keep in mind, Khalid ibn al-Walid has been a warrior since he was a child. So the way he speaks is going to be the speech of a warrior. You have to keep that in mind. So this is what one of his letters read. Praise belongs to Allah who created chaos in your system, slowed you down, and broke your unity. Had we not arrived in this land, it would have been a disaster for you. You would have killed each other, destroyed each other. Now, it's better that you submit to us, and we shall leave this land. We'll leave. If you just give up your leadership here, and we'll go somewhere else. However, if you refuse, then you're going to meet people who love death more than you love life. This is the way. He's giving them a threat as well as an invitation at the same time. Another letter read, "Glory belongs to Allah who humbled your pride, broke your alliance to pieces, and raised your glory to the ground. So accept Islam and you will be safe, or seek our protection and pay the poll tax. Otherwise, I'm bringing to you people who love death more than you love to drink wine." These people love to drink wine. So he says, these people, meaning you don't underestimate us, right? We're not playing around. So if you think that we're some weaklings or something like that, take our advance seriously. So what happened then? So now the letter of Khalid arrives to the Persians at the capital city of Al-Madain, what's known as Ctesiphon. All right? Al-Madain is a very important city, by the way. Just let me give you an idea of what the Persian Empire was like at the time. Ctesiphon or Madain was ranked among historians as the most populated city in the world at this time. There's no other city that was more populated, larger than this. Right? So sometimes it was Rome, sometimes it was some city in China or something like that. At this time, this was the largest city in the world, according to Western historians. So it's important to understand that. Right? So the letters of Khalid arrived at the Persian capital in the city of Al-Madain when Khusro az-Shir just passed away. Okay, so let's see. The leader had just passed away. So Khusro az-Shir, he was the leader of Persia. He just died. So meaning they didn't even have a leader at this time. So the Sassanid Empire, the Persians, they were without any central leader. They had no emperor. So what happened? This is obviously a problem for them. Khalid proceeds to Anbar, north of Kufa, and one of the leaders, so Khalid is moving up north, okay, towards the capital of the Persians. The leader, Shirzad, okay, he tries to negotiate peace. So he says, you know what? Okay, let's just have a peace. Even though they're not really sincere about it, they say, you know what? Let's not fight. Let's try and have a peace agreement. We're going to give you this much and you give us this in return. Khalid said, these terms are not acceptable. So they said, okay, fine. These people were ready to fight. They had trenches dug around the city. Remember the Battle of the Trench around Medina? Where did they learn the tactic of trench building? From the Persians. So these guys know warfare. So they're digging trenches around their city. They're preparing for a long drawn out battle. So now what do? So Khalid doesn't like these terms. He says, no, you can't just say, oh, well, we're just going to have some peace treaty, but we're not going to give you anything, and we're just going to, let you go like that. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way, politics works. You have to understand politics and war and the framework of empire at that time to understand all of this properly. Don't think like a liberal American, pacifist living in the 21st century. That's not the reality of that time. And some people may argue that's not the reality of this time either, but that's another stance. So what happened was they prepared for battle. So what did Khalid do? Khalid wants to have a peace treaty, but you can't insult us like this. You have to make a real peace treaty, not on whatever terms you feel like. So this is the Battle of the Trench. The trench is, you saw how it prevented the Quraysh and the people from getting across and attacking the city of Medina. Trench can, stop an advancing army. So Khalid, remember, where was Khalid, by the way, during the Battle of the Trench? On the other side. He was fighting against Medina. Right? So he's a smart guy. When he was non-Muslim and when he was Muslim, he remained a smart guy. He's a clever guy. He knows what to do. He's a military strategist. One of the greatest that ever lived. So he decides, okay, there must be some way to get across this trench. So what did they do? They had this large army. So he decides on a strategy. He takes all the weak camels in the entire army, and he says, all these camels, kill all of them and start throwing them inside the trench. Because camels are the biggest thing that they have. Stack them up, and then we ride the horses over the dead camels. So they filled the trench with all the dead camels right there. They led them up, killed them, threw them in the trench quickly. Went right over. The entire army, the other side, they find that the Muslim army is across the trench. Immediately, they sign a peace agreement according to Khalid's terms. So the entire thing changed, right? So they realized, so anyways, so Shirazad accepted peace on Khalid's terms rather than his own. Then there were a lot of other things that took place. Like for example, one of the leaders, Shahrbaraz, he tried to retake the capital. So Al-Hira was an important city. Every time Khalid left the city, the Persians would be trying to retake the city again. So this is not like I want you to understand, once you take over a city, it's not like, oh, just peaceful, everything's going to chill out, and everyone's going to sit back and relax. They're always trying to take over the city again. So you have to be in one place, you have to come back, you have to defend the city, then you have to go somewhere else. This is the way it worked at that time. So there were many other battles that were fought. Every single time, the Muslims were outnumbered, every single time, but they didn't lose a single battle to the Persians during this time. They didn't lose a single battle to the Persians. So what we'll do is, let's just begin with the Persians, and then we'll break for prayer, inshallah. So, the Romans. Now let's talk about what happened with the Romans. Romans are north, west. Okay? So, they belong to the Byzantine Empire. Right? So, the Byzantine Empire is the Eastern Roman Empire, which we talked about was more powerful at this time than the Western Roman Empire. So, even though it's called Roman, Rome is part of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire was actually more powerful. They controlled Asia Minor. What is Asia Minor? The entire region of Turkey in Asia. So that entire region. They controlled Egypt. They controlled Abyssinia. They controlled Palestine. They controlled Syria and all the other regions. The Jordan region, what we call modern day Lebanon. All these regions they would control. They had control of all these, and the Balkans as well. So the entire Eastern Europe, Bosnia and Croatia and all these areas. So very large empire, very powerful. In the 7th year after Hijrah, the 7 AH, the Romans and Persians, after fighting for such a long time, actually made a peace agreement when the Prophet was alive. During that time, they made a peace agreement. And they realized that, you know what, now that they had peace amongst themselves, at least for a little while, now that Arabia became unified under the Prophet, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be tensions, right? So what happened was, when the Prophet had sent letters out, he sent a letter to Heraclius, which was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire at that time. What was the response of Heraclius to the letter sent by the Prophet? Yeah, he asked Abu Sufyan certain questions and everything. Overall, what was the response though? Positive, negative, neutral, respectful? Yeah, kind of respectful, not like insulting or anything like that, but we're not really interested in Islam either, right? So kind of there. Another guy who got the letter was the king of the Ghassan tribe. So the king of the Ghassan tribe was one of the Arabs who was allied with the Romans. So they're under the Roman Empire. What did he do when he received the letter? He killed the messenger. He killed the envoy. Now, when you kill the messenger who's giving a letter on behalf, that's a sign of war, right? So what happened was, at that time, and we already studied this, the Prophet responded by sending an army to Mu'tah. And that's where this entire battle took place with Khalid ibn al-Walid, right? Afterwards, the Prophet ﷺ himself went to expedition of Tabuk, and the Romans weren't there. Either they fled or the intelligence was wrong or whatever it is. The third time they sent an army to Ubna with Usama. And we already talked about that, how Usama had defeated the Persians, was victorious and came back. This is the historical background of the Romans. Okay? Now, Abu Bakr sent a man by the name of Khalid ibn Sa'id. And you have to be careful in your book, if you're reading the book. Khalid ibn Sa'id is not Khalid ibn al-Walid. And oftentimes they write Khalid did this and Khalid did that. It's not the same Khalid. So you have to be careful. I think there's actually errors in the book where sometimes they put Khalid ibn al-Walid. It was actually Khalid ibn Sa'id. So you have to realize they're two different Khalids. He sent Khalid ibn Sa'id to the borders right before the borders of the Roman Empire. And he sent an army over there to a place called Tayma, where the Muslims were actually allied with the city. So they had a peace agreement with the city, so there's no active war or anything, they're just preparing just in case the Romans try to do something again. What did Heraclius do? When he heard, because they've already experienced 3 encounters now, 3 times now, right? Mu'tah, Tabuk, there was no encounter, but it was there, and Ubna. Now Heraclius is getting scared, the leader of the Romans. As soon as he hears that Abu Bakr has dispatched the army near the borders, he personally leaves the capital. What was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire called? Constantinople, right? So he leaves Constantinople and he comes to Syria, what we call modern day Syria. So just a note about Syria. Every time I use the word Syria in this class, Syria means Sham, which is traditionally known as the Levant or whatever it is. That basically refers to Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. That entire area. Okay, it's not just the country of Syria today. So he comes to the region of Syria to personally fight the Muslims. He amasses this huge army of Arab tribes coming together. So who's going to be fighting on the front lines? The Romans? No, the Arabs. The Romans are going to be leading and telling them what to do and where to run, all of that stuff. How to bury their own guys who are dead. So basically the Arabs are actually fighting in the beginning right now. Okay? So we will talk about what happens next after the prayer, inshallah ta'ala. And at the end of class, we'll have Q&A, inshallah ta'ala. So I'll see you after prayer. Assalamu alaikum. Ready? Alright. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. So, the Byzantine Empire, continuing on. So the Arab tribes under Roman leadership basically assembled. Okay, now this was around the same time when the armies that Abu Bakr had sent to fight the apostates were returning back to Medina successful. So this is a time frame. So this is perfect timing actually. So now that the armies are coming back into Medina, now Abu Bakr decides to react. So Heraclius started amassing this huge army. So Abu Bakr's response is, now that all the other battalions that were dealing with the apostate tribes had come back to Medina, we're going to take all these guys and respond back to Heraclius. He wants to establish, gather this huge army. We can respond by gathering a huge army as well. Or at least huge from their Muslim perspective. Right? So Abu Bakr gathered together 4 armies. Okay? Let's see, where are we? So he sent 4 armies towards the region of Syria. And he sent them from different directions to Syria. So one of them came from the bottom, one came from the right, one came from the left, from all different directions. As soon as the Romans got word that these armies were on their way, they split up. They had already they had assembled this huge army, the Romans as well. They saw the Muslims split up into 4 divisions. They split their army up and they said each one is going to deal with one independently. So they modified their strategy. As soon as the Muslims realized what they were doing, they also split up. They also, instead of splitting up, they came back and they combined together to form one army. So 4 armies came together and became one army, and they stopped at a place known as Yarmouk. And the Muslims had 40,000 soldiers. So this is one of the largest armies that they've ever amassed. Okay, so they stopped at a place called Yarmouk, which is in the southwestern part of the region, of the Syrian region. The Romans did the same thing. They regrouped, but they had 240,000 soldiers. So way outnumbering the Muslims, but for the Muslims, 40,000 is pretty large, right? So what happened was, there was a standoff for a very long time. There was a standoff for about 2 months. And they were deciding, are we going to fight or are we not going to fight? Is this going to end up in war or is this not going to end up in war? So there was a standoff for a very long time. In the meantime, Abu Bakr sends word to Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid ibn al-Walid is where right now? Where? In Persia, right? In the Iraq region. So he says, you need to go immediately and travel over to Roman territory, and you need to cross over and you need to join the Muslims who are waiting at Yarmouk for you. Khalid speeds over there in record time. Right? He manages to get there in a really short amount of time. And historians look at how he did this. It's very interesting, but we're going to leave that. He makes it to Yarmouk. Abu Bakr appoints Khalid ibn al-Walid in charge of this entire army, which is almost 50,000. So it's a huge army. Khalid ibn al-Walid is the supreme commander. Before this battle takes place, so Khalid is there. Before this battle takes place, one of the Roman generals in the army, he goes out to meet Khalid. So what does Khalid think? He knows me very well. It's time for a duel. We're gonna battle. So this guy's name is Jurja. Okay, Jurja ibn Budhiya, or George, General George. So General George goes out and he decides, I want to go and talk to Khalid. So Khalid's walking up and Khalid's just ready, and he sees, okay, the guy, he didn't pull out his sword yet. So Khalid is just ready to pull out his sword. He's like, we're gonna go one-on-one combat, because he enjoys this kind of thing, right? And then the guy comes closer and he says, this guy's not pulling out his sword. The guy explains, I want to talk to you. I have some questions for you. So Khalid says, okay, let's talk. So he starts asking him some questions about Islam. And Khalid starts explaining what is Islam. After a while, short conversation takes place. General George accepts Islam. And he joins the Muslim army. And he goes over himself and he joins the Muslim army, and in the battle that ensued afterwards, he was actually killed in that battle. But one battle, subhanAllah, he may not have even prayed a prayer or two, but he died as a martyr. So anyways, that just shows you that even there was always an opportunity for people to still learn about Islam and go to the other side. There's really no excuse to say, oh, well, you know what, the army is the army. A soldier is a soldier. They cannot know these things. They cannot think about these things. No, there's still always opportunities. If a general of that stature could do something like this, anyone else could do something like this. And there probably were some soldiers here and there who were doing these things as well. So anyways, the battle broke up. So the battle started, and there were 6 days of heavy fighting. And this is a very important battle, by the way, in history. It's an important battle for the Muslims, and it's an important battle which non-Muslim historians study. You'll see books and books written about it, because the strategy that Khalid ibn al-Walid actually used was really interesting, because they're a very small army compared to the Romans. So one of the things that he did was he separated the entire army into small groups, small squadrons, and they were spread out as much as possible. So it made it look like this army was huge, because normally you don't spread your army that thin into such small groups. But he did that, and he aligned them in such a way on the horizon that it gave the appearance from their perspective that this army is just massive. So he used like the technique of illusion to actually make it look like they were larger than they really were. And he used a lot of other techniques. Military commanders later on, throughout history, the French, Germans, they've actually studied Khalid ibn al-Walid's strategies, and one of the strategies that they used to study is how he won at Yarmouk, because it's very interesting. So there's a lot of research done on this, a lot of books written about this battle. So basically, but to make a long story short, there was heavy fighting for 6 days. Eventually the Romans retreated, and this was one of the biggest victories for the Muslims. So this was a huge, huge victory. Heraclius, the emperor, retreated back. He left Syria, and he made sure that Damascus and Hims, the two major cities in this region, are given extra fortification so that there's no issues later on. So let's take a look at Abu Bakr, some of his accomplishments. First of all, his military accomplishments, as we've already been seeing, Abu Bakr used to direct the army on everything that it's doing. So everything that was going on, Khalid, Ikrimah, all the other generals, they were sending letters back and forth all the time to Khalid, telling him, to Abu Bakr, this is what happened now, what should we do now? He would send a letter back. This is what happened now, what should we do now? He'd write a letter back. He wanted to know everything. And he was really clever, because he would get information from the Muslim commander. He would have soldiers in the army writing details to him, what's going on. And he would have civilians writing as well their observation of what the army is doing. So it's never just information coming from one source within the army, in case the army decides to, say whatever it wants to say about themselves. He would have other sources coming in, and then he would weigh all these sources and then decide what steps to take. Very, very clever, very smart. Too bad people don't use that anymore today in the modern world. So he left Khalid ibn al-Walid in charge most of the time in major battles, and he became a very very powerful person, and people were even scared of his name. The Romans and Persians used to tremble at just hearing Khalid ibn al-Walid's name. In fact, interesting thing is this General George, one of the conversation that took place, some of it's been recorded. So one of the first thing that he asked him, he said, look, I want you to tell me the truth. He says, what's your first question about Islam? His first question about Islam was, is it true that you have a sword that Allah gave you, and this is how you win every battle? It's like, no. It's like, then how did you get the name Sword of Allah? Where did it come from? Because you have to have some special sword. He says, no, I was nicknamed Sword of Allah from this and this and this. Then he explained Islam to him. So people were so in awe of Khalid because he never lost a battle. This guy had never lost a single battle. So that was one thing. The second thing is, Abu Bakr made the decision to take on the Roman and Persian empires while apostasy was still being resolved in Arabia. So he dealt with local apostasy in Arabia, the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire, all at the same time while doing other things. So this is a guy this is not what they call, a lame duck president. He's not one of those, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of those coming up. But he's definitely not one of those. He's the guy who did stuff, so this is interesting. And what's really interesting thing is, if you just look at this map here, this is unfortunately again Arabic, but this is the region of what we call, expansion or conquest or whatever word you want to use, This is Roman region, this is Persian region. It looks small, but these are Roman empires. And he managed to reclaim whatever issues were going on over here. This is huge because, right, these are two major world empires, right? What year are we looking at right now? What year are we in? Past 13, 13, right? The year 13. So 13, right? When was the Hijrah? This is 13 AH, which means after Hijrah, right? What happened? What was going on 13 years ago? A few hundred Muslims were leaving the city of Mecca, migrating away from persecution, leaving their homes, not knowing if they ever even go back, or leaving all their possessions behind. In 13 years, they're taking on the two most powerful empires at the time. The thing is, sociologists fail to understand how this happened, because there's never been an empire in history that ever grew that fast. It takes a lot of time. It took hundreds of years for the Roman, they say Rome wasn't built overnight. That's right, it wasn't built overnight. It was built over hundreds of years, right? It never got to this point. Persian Empire, Chinese empires, different empires, they were not built overnight. They did not expand like this. So people fail to understand, how did this all of a sudden happen? So anyways, you can give explanations, or you can also say, of course, there's divine help. There's help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of these things. Other accomplishments, his economic policy. Abu Bakr's economic policy, like I said, we're not only talking about battles in this class, we're trying to talk about more, although initially there's a lot of battles happening initially here. There was no guard at the Muslim treasury. So we talked about what kind of riches and wealth was coming in. You fight the Persians or the Romans, a lot of spoils of war are going to be coming in, and they go to the Muslim treasury. So there was no guard at the Muslim treasury. They didn't even have a guard there. The Muslim treasury is like the state treasury. Has all the wealth that's being distributed to the civilian population, all the zakat that's coming in, other charity that's coming in. It was almost always empty though. There's no guard because there's nothing there. So you say, how can there be nothing there? There's nothing in the charity. It can't be Abu Bakr taking it, because he's living in a little house and he doesn't even have barely a salary. And it's not that no money is coming in, because with all these successes, money is coming in. So where's all the money going? Abu Bakr used to distribute it back to the people. When we talk about like social policy and all of that, he's always distributing it back to the people who are in need in society. So it was almost always empty. So he was distributing all of these funds and giving it out to other people. So that's pretty much as well. There's a lot more we can talk about, but we're going to kind of speed through it. So Abu Bakr passing away. He caught fever in the middle of the 13th year after Hijrah. And when it was clear to him that, you know what, he's on his deathbed. This is a fever that doesn't look like he's going to recover from. He decided that he wants to leave the Muslims united because he saw the potential danger that happened at the courtyard of Banu Sa'idah. Remember that? When they were deciding what's going to happen, who's going to be Khalifa and all that, he said, you know what, we don't want to risk it. I'm going to appoint somebody, and everyone respected him, so probably they're going to accept my decision, hopefully. But I'm going to consult with some senior leaders, and then I'm going to appoint somebody so that the same issue doesn't happen where people are debating who should be the next leader, who should be the next leader. So he decides unity of Muslims is very important. So he consulted some of the senior companions, and he was leaning towards Umar. So he started asking them, what do you guys think about Umar? You know, because Umar was his right-hand man. Remember, Umar, he called him back from the army of Usama to stay in Medina and give him advice. So he started consulting people. Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, one of the senior companions, he responded and he said, let's see if his response is there. He is very strict and severe in his behavior. You're gonna put Umar in charge? This guy is too tough. He's too strong and he's too strict. This is not the kind of guy who should be the Khalifa. Abu Bakr responded and he said, his strictness was due to my softness. I realized that Umar always adopted a tough stance whenever I took a soft stance. But he always turned soft when I became tough. So whenever I was tough, then he became soft and vice versa. And we see that. Abu Bakr said, we are going to deal with these guys who are not paying zakat in a hard way. And Umar said, no, let's take it easy on them. So Umar became tough, Abu Bakr became tough, Umar became soft. Same thing, sending out the army of Osama to the Romans. So you see that they complemented each other. So then he says, I think that the position of Khalifa will make him soft and will make him moderate in his approach overall, even if I'm not there. So he'll become moderate and soft, even though he looks like he's tough a lot, I think he's going to balance himself out quite nicely. So Umar was known to be rough, but Abu Bakr knew him very well. The other people gave him mostly positive feedback. They say, Umar, he's a sincere guy, he's a good guy. Everyone else said, okay, he's a pretty good choice. So Abu Bakr writes a bequest. A bequest, what is a bequest? Wasiyah, yeah. It's like a will, form of will. This is what I want you to do after my death. And we're going to cover that in the Islamic law class in more detail. What is a bequest? So he wrote a bequest. And he says, I want Umar to be the leader after me. So that's one thing he did. So he wrote it down. So it's clear. Nobody, this is really smart by the way, because there is such possibility for disunity. Like he almost saw it could have happened. So to prevent that, he said, we're going to get it in writing. It's going to be written down, so no one can say that I didn't say that. No one can come and pretend like I didn't say that. Number one. Number two, he said it's going to be read out to the people. So I want to make sure that everyone hears this letter of mine. Okay? Once it's been read out to the people, then he walks outside personally, even though he could barely walk. He was very, very sick. And he said, look, I need to actually tell the people directly. It's not good enough that you just read it. You read the long part, I need to give them a little personal touch to it. So he walks out and he tells the people, I have not appointed any relative of mine as Khalifa. I have not chosen Umar on my own. I have consulted with people of sound judgment. So he's setting two precedents. One, I'm not appointing one of my own family members. Umar is not a direct family member of mine. Number two, I didn't choose him just myself. I consulted other people and I took counsel. Do you agree that he's your leader then? So he asked the people, will you accept this guy as your leader? This is my desire, my wish. So the people answered, yes, we will agree with your choice. So he said, then you make sure that you follow his orders and you make sure to obey him, because that's going to determine whether he's going to become a successful leader or not. You can be a great leader, but if your people don't follow you, it's not going to do anything for you. It's not going to help you at all. Right? So the people pledged allegiance to Umar, and while Abu Bakr was still alive. And Abu Bakr died a few days later. He was buried next to the Messenger of Allah with his head being in line with the shoulder of the Prophet ﷺ. And he's still there in Medina, buried next to the Prophet. When Abu Bakr died, he had almost no possessions when he died. So this guy almost had nothing. Let's take a look at what he actually did have. Okay, he had one camel whose milk he used to drink and he used to ride it. He had this big bowl which he used to eat from, and he had some sheets, to sleep on and all of that. The problem is, all of these things were actually borrowed from the Muslim treasury, Baytul Mal. So he issued an instruction to Umar that all of these should be returned back because I took them in my capacity as Khalifa. And now that I'm dead, I don't have that job anymore. So all of this stuff has to go back and my family will have to suffice on, whatever they have, whatever they're going to be sufficing on. So this was Abu Bakr. Then we move on to Umar. So Abu Bakr lived about 2 years and 3 months. Very short leadership term of Khilafah. Moving on to Umar. So now Umar has been put in position. Let's take a look at some of his qualifications for leadership. He was 13 years younger than the Prophet. He was one of the few people in Mecca who could actually read and write before he accepted Islam. So very few people, remember we talked about, could read and write. He was one of them. He was the father-in-law of the Prophet. Hafsa, his daughter, was the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of the early believers, not among the first, but among the very early ones still. And he participated in every major event in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. He participated in the migration, he participated in the boycott, he participated in all the battles, all the treaties, everything. Muslims were actually able to pray at the Kaaba again after he accepted Islam because of his stature. People were afraid of him. So Muslims had to pray in secret. When he accepted Islam, they could actually start praying in public again. He was given the name Al-Faruq because of that. That's the reason. Al-Faruq is his nickname, which means the criterion, or the one who separates truth from falsehood. Something which separates between the true and the false. Because he was insisting that we need to pray in public, we need to go to the Kaaba, we're on the truth, we shouldn't be scared of these people. So he was trying to insist to the Prophet that we should do this and we shouldn't wait any longer. The waiting should be done. So he given the nickname of Al-Faruq. This is according to most Muslim sources. There's like one or two that mention a different reason for it, but I'd say this is probably the most authentic one. So now let's talk about the Persians. So Umar now is the Khalifa. When Khalid ibn al-Walid left Persia for Roman territory, he left a man by the name of Muthanna in charge. So the guy's name is not important, but Muthanna, basically this guy who's in charge of the city of, which city? The main city, Al-Hira, right? The city of Al-Hira. This man now is asking Umar for reinforcements. Why would he be asking Umar for reinforcements? What about Persia? They're attacking his city. Why? Why would they be attacking his city? No, number one, they know that Khalid ibn al-Walid just left for Rome, the Roman territory. This is the best time to attack. Khalid, their hero, is gone, right? And they're kind of uniting themselves together, so they're attacking constantly. So Muthanna sends a letter to Umar and says, "We need reinforcements. They're attacking day and night. We can't keep this up." So this is what's going on in Persia at that time. The Persian leader whom they appointed had actually died. They lost their leader again. They lost their emperor. They somehow started dying. Sometimes their own kids would kill them, and sometimes they would just die of whatever other circumstances. So they appointed Buran. Buran was one of the daughters of Khusro. So she became the empress of Persia. So now a woman is in charge, actually for the second time, of Persia. So this is what they used to do. It doesn't matter for them. So what does she do? She's in charge now. She sends out 3 large armies to take back all the territories that the Muslims had taken. So they're ready for all-out war. And they're regrouping themselves. So what do? She does that, and she goes and sends letters to all the farmers in the outside regions to go and revolt against the Muslims and get rid of them. So now there's a major problem going on in Persia. So now we have some things happen. The Abu Bakr Umar now sends some reinforcements, and they need to basically manage themselves while they're in Persia because the rest of the main army is in Roman territory. So now we have a few battles which we'll talk about. One of them is called the Battle of the Bridge. The Battle of the Bridge was led by Persian military general Bahman Jadhaweh. However you pronounce that. If somebody else is Persian, they know how to pronounce that, you can enlighten me, inshallah. Abu Ubayd ibn Mas'ud replaced Muthanna. So what happened was when Umar comes into power, he's the Khalifa now. He starts shaking things up a little bit. He starts replacing people. He replaces and removes Khalid ibn al-Walid from his post, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail. He removes Muthanna as well. Muthanna's out, Abu Ubaidah now is in charge. And when I say out, meaning out of the top position. He's still a general, he's still an important guy, but he's not the leader. So Umar starts shaking things up a little bit. So there was a battle that took place known as the Battle of the Bridge in the year 13. Abu Ubayd ibn Mas'ud, is in charge. Basically, yeah. No, Ibn Mas'ud. Abu Ubaidah comes later. He comes later on, afterwards. As far as I know, the Battle of the Bridge. We can research it, inshallah. If you find something different, let me know. The Battle of the Bridge. So basically what happens is, keep in mind, Muslims are not used to fighting around rivers because they live in Arabia. They live in the desert. There's not really many rivers. So they're not used to fighting near rivers. And there's a lot of rivers. There's Tigris, Euphrates, rivers going up in Persia. So basically the two armies meet and they're on opposite sides of, which river was it? Euphrates River. So the Persians are on one side and the Muslims are on the other side. So there's two armies. What do? The Persians, they know how to build bridges and stuff because they're used to this. This is their land. So they build a bridge over the river. And then Bahman, this leader, he gives Abu Ubayd the opportunity. He said, I give you the option. Either we cross over the bridge and then we fight, or you cross over the bridge and we fight. You choose. So Abu Ubayd, he makes this decision, which was against the council of the other people he was consulting. And they said, you know what, look, we don't want the river to our back because we're not used to fighting like that. What's going to happen? This is a flimsy bridge. Maybe they'll attack us while we're on the bridge. We can't trust these people. We don't know. We're not experienced in this type of combat. We've never dealt with this type of fighting before. So let's not do it. But he goes and says, no, come on. We have not lost to the Persians even one battle. Let's take them. So they decide to go and cross the bridge. So they cross the bridge, but this was a really bad move actually. So what happened was, the problem is, Muslims are now facing an army, Persian army, which has a lot of battle elephants. So they had these giant elephants, and they're armored, right? They got armor all over the elephants. There's people on top of the elephants who are archers, and they're shooting, and the elephant is armored completely. So now now imagine, and just think how smart they are. And they got horses surrounding the elephant. So if you try and attack the elephant, the horsemen are going to keep you away from the elephant while we shoot you with arrows from the top. These are like tanks, okay? These are like modern day tanks basically. So now they got a bunch of tanks and the Muslims don't have that, and they've never encountered these kind of battle elephants before. So what happens? Abu Ubayd himself, he gets smashed under an elephant. A lot of the other generals, they all get trampled under the elephant while trying to take the elephant. So they try to cut off the trunk. They're trying to figure out ways. What do you do with the elephants? How do you get rid of them? So they started, okay, let's cut off its trunk, or let's cut off its foot or something like that. You have to figure out some strategy to deal with them, and they've never dealt with these elephants, and they're a big problem. So this army actually lost. And another thing that happened was, one of the Muslim soldiers, I guess either he was brave or he thought he was clever, he went in the back and he broke the bridge. So why did he break the bridge? He said, so that no one retreats and we keep fighting. We have to keep fighting, and we want to encourage people that we're Muslims, we don't retreat. So he broke the bridge. So what happened was that these elephants are just decimating the Muslim army. Generals Abu Ubayd's gone. The next general comes in, he dies. I think like 7 generals died just from the elephants, all of them being crushed or killed. The Muslim soldiers try to retreat. A lot of them get stuck. They end up going in the river and they drown and they die in the river. Until finally they're able to repair the bridge. Muslims managed to repair the bridge. Some of the army remaining, Muthanna and some other guys, they managed to retreat across the bridge and they flee. So Muslims lost this battle. They lost this battle. What happens though is, another battle takes place very soon after this one. And that's known as the Battle of Buwaib. Now remember that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is a statement that he made authentic. He said, the believer is not bitten from the same hole twice. Right? Meaning that you learn your lesson. You don't make the same mistake twice. So now, Muthanna and some of the other people, they're meeting again. So the two armies, again, they regroup and they meet again at the Euphrates again. This time, Muthanna says, you guys cross the river. Right? And the Persians are fine because they're used to fighting with the river behind them. So they're not going to have a major issue like the Muslims would have. So the Persians this time, they cross the river and a fight ensues. And this time the Muslims win. Okay, so there's basically I'm just showing you a few pictures from some of the different battles that were taking place. Okay, the Muslims had victory this time. They had more experience with the elephants. They understood, the land. They had the land behind them. So this was something that they're more used to. Better strategy. So now we'll talk about tensions rising, and then we'll stop, inshallah. So what happened was, some of these defeats are going on. Persians are losing. So the other battles took place, and among the Persian leaders, because their leader is a woman, she's not a military general, right? So what happens is the Persian generals start infighting with each other. So one of them is saying, I'm like the main guy, and the guy, no, I'm the main guy, and all of that. So they start having a problem. So then they realize that, this is not going to work anymore. We can't keep going like this, because even though the woman is in charge, she's not considered to be a soldier. Therefore, the military generals kind of have like an upper edge over her, but they're fighting amongst themselves. So the Persians decide this is not going to work. We need to have an emperor who's a proper emperor. We need to find somebody, and we need to unify ourselves. We fight each other. We hate each other. We can hate each other another day. Right now, we need to unite and we need to deal with the Muslims. So they decide we need to get together and unite. So they crowned Yazdajird as the emperor. So he became the new emperor. He immediately sends out 3 large armies to deal with the Muslims, just like what the other lady did. But he's going in, stepping up the game a little bit. So they wanted some strong, centralized leadership. Send out 3 armies. Okay. What does Umar do? Umar realizes now, okay, the Persians are uniting. We need to do something about this. We can't just let this go. So what does he do? He sends letters out to all the cities in Arabia, everywhere. And he says, anyone you have, anyone who can fight, you send them to Medina, or if they're near Persia, you send them straight to Persia. We need everyone on board. I don't care what it is. Everyone has to get involved in this right now. So the soldiers start coming in, or even non-soldiers start coming into Medina and going into Persia to get prepared to deal with this new Persian emperor who's taking over charge of the army. Umar takes the army and he sets out himself to go and lead the army. So he starts leaving Medina and he's leading the army. He says, I'm going to handle this myself personally. As soon as he reaches the first station where the army stops, the companion, and by the way, he left Ali in charge of the city of Medina behind him. So what happened was, as he leaves, what happens is that some of the companions, they send him a letter and say, you know what, this is not a good decision. This is not wise. You're the Khalifa. If you go and you take on the Persian army and you die, we're going to have a problem. Abu Bakr put you in charge. Abu Bakr appointed you, right, for a reason, so that there's no disunity. And if you die, we're going to have a problem. So you need to stay in Medina. So stay in Medina. So he didn't like the idea, but he was convinced. Later on, he decided, okay, fine. I'm going to stay in Medina because people are putting pressure on me. So he stayed. He appointed Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas as the leader over the army instead of Khalid, and he sent all of them from Medina to Persia or to Iraq. But before departing, he gave this advice, and this is very good advice, and we'll end with this. This is his advice. Do not be overconfident of the aid of Allah. That you don't think that you're guaranteed to get Allah's help just because you're Muslims. Allah does not wipe out evil with evil. This is deep. Allah does not wipe out evil with evil. Rather, He wipes out evil with good. What does He mean by that? If you happen to behave badly, if you become evil Muslims, bad Muslims, Allah is not going to use you to remove somebody else who's a tyrant or an oppressor. Only if you're good is He going to use you. He's not going to use something bad to remove something else bad. Although sometimes that happens, but He's trying to give a warning. Right? He's trying to give a warning here. He says, Allah has no relationship with anyone except through His obedience. All people are equal in the religion of Allah. So don't start getting this tribal superiority, especially seeing the Persians, they have this, class system and all that. Don't start any of that stuff. I command you and your soldiers to be more cautious concerning your own actions rather than of your enemy. What is He saying? He's saying, don't be so concerned. The enemy's this, enemy's big. They have so many soldiers. They're the Persian Empire. You need to be more concerned with you. You guys are the problem. If you guys start being bad Muslims and start sinning, this is going to lead to your defeat. It's not the other army that's the problem you should be worrying about. My main fear is what you guys are going to be doing. He said, that is because the sins of an army should be more frightening to them than the enemy. Really deep. The Muslims are assisted by their enemies' disobedience to Allah. Meaning, why does Allah give you support even though you have smaller armies? Because of their disobedience to Allah, Allah gives you help. If it was not for that, we would not have the strength to fight these people. Our numbers are not equal to their numbers, nor are our resources. So He knows we're outnumbered. If we equal them in the disobedience of Allah, then they become stronger than us because of their numbers. But if we are obedient to Allah, we become stronger than them despite their resources. Then He says, if not, it will be aided through our virtue and not through our strength. Do not commit any acts of disobedience while you are fighting for the cause of Allah. And do not say, our enemy is worse than us, and he will therefore not have the upper hand. Don't just think that because your enemy is a little bit worse than you, you're a little bit better than them, then therefore all of a sudden Allah is going to grant you victory. It's not just if you're bad but they're worse. So, we're better, so we're more beloved in the sight of Allah. It's not enough. Right? It's not enough. And then He said, there were times when nations who were worse were given authority over people who were better. He said, like the Magians, the pagans. The Magians were worse, but they were given authority over the children of Israel, the Banu Israel, when the latter committed acts of disobedience. So He's giving the example from the Quran and from history that the children of Israel, the Banu Israel, who were the Muslims at that time, when they started disobeying Allah, Allah let their enemies take them over. And that was the reason for their downfall. So He said, ask Allah to help you against yourselves the same way that you ask Him to help you against your enemy. This is really important because nowadays the situation, we're always asking Allah, oh Allah, help the Muslims and give izzah to the Muslims and remove this from the enemies. But we never ask Allah, or rarely do we ask Allah to help us against our own selves. Because we're a major part of the problem of what's happening. And Umar realized that and he's seeing that. So inshallah we'll stop here and we'll take questions. Questions, inshallah. Yes, bro.
So the reason why Umar pushed belief, probably the belief was close, and also was respected for this battle.
We're going to cover it in more detail next week, inshallah. In a lot more detail. I'll explain it in detail, inshallah. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Abu Bakr appointed Umar as his successor. Why, or do we have a reason that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu didn't do that?
So why didn't the Prophet appoint a successor when Abu Bakr appointed a successor? Because he wanted to leave the method of appointing the next leader open to the Muslim community. So we're going to find that Abu Bakr did one thing, Umar did not follow him. Umar did something different. Right? And after him, when Umar was killed, something else happened. So there's different ways to put a leader into power. And the Prophet wanted to leave it open for the Muslim community to decide, but based upon smart principles. But he left it open so that there's not only one way that it's stuck. Because every community has their own way of doing it. Right? Yes, good question. Yes. Yeah, the people who are receiving revelation or claim to be prophets, were they receiving revelation? I mean, in reality, no, they're not receiving revelation. Were they even deluded? Probably most of them were not even deluded, in the sense that they were just doing it for power. So they're not really receiving anything. Maybe one or two of them were legitimately crazy and were getting some kind of revelation, feeling like they're getting a revelation. But the majority of them, it was just done for power. And in fact, the ones who came back, like Tulayha, he came back to Islam. So they started asking him, these revelations that you supposedly got when you were a prophet, tell us what was going on. He said, yeah, it wasn't really, it wasn't really anything, So even a lot of them, when they came back to Islam, they're like, yeah, okay, we really didn't have anything, We make tawbah from that, and we ask Allah for forgiveness. That wasn't true. Yeah.
So given what you just said about coming back to Islam, and coming back to Islam, and the whole issue about apostates being killed with such and such, and there's a lot of other evidence. What is your take on that? Or as Muslims, what is our take on, you want to do something else?
Yeah, okay, the whole issue of apostasy and killing the apostates is going to be covered in Islamic law in detail. Sunday class, inshallah. So it's a long topic. So yeah, so Sunday class will cover that, inshallah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
So the Heraclius that we talked about that fought against Abu Bakr's army, the Syrians, is this the same Heraclius that actually was who tested Abu Sufyan and was actually even leaning towards Islam?
This is the same Heraclius.
Okay.
Yes.
That seems more evidence that he didn't.
Yeah. No, it's quite clear that he didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
And the other question was in regards to Khalid ibn Walid with the tactic that he used. Isn't that the same tactic that he actually used against in the expedition of Malta?
Which tactic you're talking about?
The one where he managed to separate the army into groups.
Yeah. So it's similar. So is the tactic that Khalid used in Yarmouk similar to the tactic he used in Mu'tah? Yeah, it's very similar, but a little bit different. So what he did was he made it seem like there were reinforcements arriving in Mu'tah. Whereas in Yarmouk, he just made it seem like it was larger rather than arriving, like some fresh guys arriving. Yeah, so a little bit different. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk about the whole issue of Khalid ibn Walid leaving next week, inshallah, in detail. Yes.
For those people who say that Islam was spread through the sword,
Yes.
For them, for the Romans, we know that they came, the message came, and that was enough for Muslims to go out and deal with it. But do we have any evidence that something the Persians did to invoke the Muslims to come and attack them?
Yeah, the Persians did two things. Okay. One, they ripped up the letter. Okay, insulted the messenger. Number two, after they ripped up the letter, they actually sent Persian soldiers to go and kidnap the Prophet in Medina. Okay, so that's pretty bad. Yeah, so that's pretty much a sign, a bad sign. So that these are among the reasons. And also, the thing is, there's politics taking place here. So this is an empire, right, who's been there for a very long time. If another power starts arising, that empire doesn't just leave it. So there's definitely plans going on to fight the Muslims. It's just the time is when. The time is when. So the Muslims are receiving intelligence. What's coming in? What's going on in Persia? What's the next step going to be and all of that? The only issue is their infighting between them, that they were a little bit delayed. They just took a little bit time because they were undergoing some internal issues and all of that. So that's the reason. So the thing is, it's definitely, if you understand politics, the idea of offense and defense and all that, it has to be understood within political circumstances. If we leave it black and white, was it defensive or was it offensive? It means you didn't understand the political situation. It's never just purely defensive or purely offensive. There's a lot more taking place. So when we understand the idea of, remember, we talked about the Battle of Badr, before the Battle of Badr, after the migration, the title of the chapter, I specifically called it Cold War. Right? If we don't understand the concept of Cold War, we won't understand these things. This is a Cold War because there's no agreement. There's no treaty, there's no alliance taking place. An alliance could have happened, but the Persians would never want to ally with the Muslims when they're the Persian Empire.
If someone asked, was there any repeated attempt to do the alliance of Persians or do the...
See, here's the thing.
After the letter?
See, this is the thing. There's no point in going and sending a letter to try and make an alliance. In the sense that once you keep on asking them, well, can we just be friends? Can we just be friends? That's not the way it works. The way it works with the empire is, you want to be friends? Okay, we're going to colonize you and we're going to take you over and you're going to be our little puppets like all the other Arabs who we'd colonized already. That's the way empire works. Right? So you have to understand within the political circumstance. It's not, I know, because especially if we understand politics based upon our understanding of today, there's no like hippie movement, peace signs and all that, like, you know what, well, why can't we just get along? That's not the way it worked over there. Even if you said, you know what, let's just get along, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So the concept of uniting together or, United Nations or all that, there were treaties that were taking place. So go back and read specifically the Cold War in the book and look at a little bit of the commentary, and I think you'll see the answers in that commentary a little bit more. I spent a lot of time writing that part. So just look at that in detail, inshallah. And I got another article as well online. If you go to academia.edu, there's an article called The Spectrum of Jihad. It answers some of these questions in more detail as well, inshallah. Okay. Yes. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes.
So there must be understanding, some sort of, during Prophet time, that Roman were not so bad to the Muslims as other parts.
Yeah, that was before the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and all of that. So that was earlier in history.
Right, but what I am saying that Allah look at the character of the nation or person.
So what exactly are you what are you asking specifically?
No, what I am asking, there must be some understanding between Roman Empire and Prophet.
Okay. There wasn't really an understanding, but the thing is, because they were Christian and they're considered people of the book, they're closer to the Muslims at that time. So that's the reason for it. Okay. Yes, brother.
After the victory at the Battle of Yarmouk, what was the position of the Christian Arabs and did they convert or were they just under Muslim rule and paid the jizya?
In Yarmouk itself, well, Yarmouk is like a little town. So you mean in the entire area?
Yeah, the ones that fought.
Okay, we're going to see what happens as soon as they move to Damascus. So once they move to Damascus, you're going to see what the Christians did at that time.
What you are saying may be partially right. Because Allah says in several places, don't make non-Muslim as your friend and protector.
Okay, that's
If you do, you are one of them.
yeah. We're going to cover that in Islamic law class, inshallah, on Sundays. Inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions? Yes. If I recall correctly, it's Bara ibn Malik, but I can look it up for you, inshallah. If I recall, it is Bara ibn Malik. The quiz is going to be on everything that was in the notes for week 1. The notes for week 1. The first slide, the first presentation. I switch presentations. So the quiz that's coming up is going to be on everything that's uploaded in Canvas, which says week 1. The PowerPoints of week 1 and the notes of week 1. Yeah, you'll read it and you'll know. It doesn't include Umar. It includes up to not everything. If I remember correctly, I'll tell you where. It's apostate uprising. It goes until Apostate uprisings eradicated. That's the last section. Inshallah. Okay? Alright, inshallah, we'll stop here, inshallah. If you have questions, you can see me, inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.